breaking and entering, drunk and disorderly, law and order. A former prosecutor and a defence lawyer, not your typical pairing. And the result? Conversations about crime and punishment that are guaranteed to get you thinking.
Welcome to Justice Matters, a weekly podcast with Lizzie Green and Joe Crowley. Our episodes are available every Monday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and YouTube. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Justice Matters Pod for clips. Enjoy the episode. This episode contains descriptions of violence and murder and violence against women. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, Lizzie.
Hello, Joe.
We're back to what we usually do, which is good old-fashioned crime.
Yeah, murder. Most foul.
Murder most foul. It certainly is. And in the tropics, in the Australian tropics up in Cairns.
Yes, North Queensland.
Yeah.
So I have to say a couple of things before we get started. So this is a very recent matter.
Yes.
In terms of court proceedings.
Yeah, it was a bit new for us. We like doing old things. But yeah, this one's hot off the press.
So this is the case of the murder of Toyah Cordingley in Cairns. And the trial was against a fellow called Rajwinder Singh.
Yes.
Now, he was tried for her murder and there was a hung jury.
Yeah, so the jury couldn't agree on whether he was guilty or innocent.
Yes. And so it's already been listed for retrial in November.
Yeah, it's a long time between. When did the trial finish just recently?
It was earlier this year, I'm pretty sure.
That's a long time between trial and retrial.
Well, I don't know if this has anything to do with it, but intel I was given was that he didn't apply for bail. There is a new judge coming up from Brisbane to hear the matter and he has retained new counsel.
Yeah.
So maybe that's all part of the delay. I'm not sure.
Oh, probably would be. New counsel would say, well, I need time to read the brief and get my head around it.
Yes. But so I wanted to talk about this with you because anyone who listens to the pod knows you have certain opinions about retrials.
I do.
And so I wanted to tell you about this case because it was a hung jury, but we don't have the retrial yet, just to see what you think about that.
Interesting.
But huge disclaimer, because it was a hung jury, there's no judgment for me to read.
Yes.
I don't have access to the trial transcript itself. And so I have taken every bit of information nearly from media reports, but across a whole range of reporters.
Yes.
And I read so many articles because people were writing articles to sum up what they had heard in court that day.
Yes. Okay.
So I can't verify everything that I'm going to tell you is 100% accurate, but I can't imagine the reporters are so far wrong that we can't get an idea of the evidence in the trial.
Yeah, but I just want to take a step back because I do find people often don't appreciate that. If it's a jury trial, there's no written record of it in terms of the reasons the jury decided someone's guilty. So that when we talk about cases on this and we say we've read the case, we're talking about ones that have gone on appeal and then the appeal court writes a judgment and we read that. So this one hasn't got to that stage. There's been a jury verdict, so no written decision and no appeal yet because he hasn't been convicted.
That's right.
Okay.
So I am a little hesitant and I do apologise in advance if some of this information I'm relying on is not 100% accurate. But I did do a lot of reading, not just one reporter, like it was a lot of reports.
No, I don't think anyone call into question your research.
Oh, they call into question my research even when it is from a judgment. Yes, apparently I get it wrong all the time. So good luck to me today.
Yeah, all right, good luck.
All right, so let's start with our victim, Toyah Cordingley. So she was a 24-year-old woman from Cairns. She grew up in Cairns and although her parents had divorced and went on to remarry, she was still very close to both of them, close to the new family. So she was very happy and people described her as loving and carefree, quite adventurous.
Yes.
She, I think, was very well known for her love of cats and dogs.
Wow, okay.
Yes. And apparently fairies. She also liked to change her hair colour, anything from red to purple, but at the time of her murder, she was a blonde. So people who've seen her photos, most of them when she had her blonde hair. She had been dating a guy called Marco Heidenreich or Heidenreich. For over 2 years. He was also an animal lover. They both had dogs. And she worked in a pharmacy, but she had worked at a place called Paws and Claws.
Oh,
for a
wow.
long
She
time.
really did love animals, didn't she?
Yeah, it was a refuge and boarding centre. And people said her real passion in life was animals.
Yeah.
So just to get a little idea of her, she volunteered with animals even after she left Paws and Claws. But between her boyfriend and her, she had a couple of dogs, took them everywhere, especially loved taking them to the beach.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So her social media pages were littered with pictures of her dogs walking or relaxing on the beach. And her very last post from social media included an image, and it read, "No matter how talented, rich or intelligent you are, how you treat animals tells me all I need to know about you."
Yeah.
There's a lot of truth in that.
Yeah, there probably is.
Yeah. So what happened to this lovely Toyah? On the day of her death, the murder, she went to work in the pharmacy. Then she went to visit a place called Rusty's Markets.
Okay, yeah,
That was in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
So this is one thing, like there are conflicting stories of what time exactly she was there, but it's been reported there was CCTV footage. So we know she was there, around the middle of the day.
Yep.
And then after she went home, she said she was going to go to a place called Wangedi Beach.
Got it.
So I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
So she's at work, then she goes to the markets, then she goes home. She doesn't go back to work?
No, she'd finished.
And then she says she's going to go to Wangedi Beach.
Yes, and so that beach was 38 kilometres north of Cairns, about halfway to Port Douglas.
Okay.
And she left home at about 2:30 with her dog, or a dog.
Yes.
Hers or Marco's.
Yes.
Marco had gone for a hike that day with a mate of his.
Yep.
So CCTV footage showed him getting fuel at around 2:30 p.m. at the Clifton Beach service station.
Yep.
He actually passed Toyah's car at Wangedi Beach.
Wow,
didn't stop.
Yeah.
He did stop and bought beer at about 2:45.
Nice.
And obviously I'm saying this because when someone gets murdered, who's the immediate first suspect?
Yeah, well, it's someone close to them. So if the statistics are you're most likely to be murdered by somebody you know, then of course the police first look at all the people who you know, and if you're in a relationship, the first person they're going to look at is your partner.
That's right. And so he was investigated.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So in some sense, he's lucky there was CCTV footage of what he was doing.
That's right.
And that he was with a mate. He wasn't just hiking by himself.
That's right. So he got a text from Toyah at 3:17 p.m.
Yes.
And that said she was going to pick up a mate at the airport that night.
Got it.
She finished the message with a little red heart emoji, and that was the last text he got from her.
Yeah.
So he began his hike with his friend at about 3:30 at Spring Creek near Mowbray.
Mm-hmm.
If that's how you say that.
I don't know.
They reached the top. They took a selfie together at 5:09 p.m. And then began the return hike. On the way back, Marco's dog went missing just about 10 minutes from the end of the trail.
Yep.
So they spent some time looking for the dog. They didn't find him.
Wow.
Yes. It had gotten dark by then. And so just after 7 p.m., Marco called Toyah to tell her about his lost dog.
Yeah.
She didn't respond. At about 7:30, he and his mate went to get torches from a friend's place. I don't know what they did with the torches. It didn't say they went back and searched. But then at about 9:30, they went back to the mate's place. He had a beer. He told his friend he hadn't heard from Toyah, so he was feeling concerned. And sometime between 10 or 10:30, he returned to Wangedi Beach.
Yeah.
He saw that Toyah's car was still there. And her dog was found nearby tied to a tree near the southern part of the beach. Now, some reports say that Marco found the dog that night. Some reports say that Toyah's mum found the dog when she was searching early the next morning.
Okay, sorry, there's two dogs here. Yeah, there was the one that was with him on the bushwalk, which got lost. He's gone. Then there's the other one that was
with
Toyah, and it was found tied to a tree, and there's conjecture about who finds it and when.
Yes. Okay. But one thing I did read was that it was tied so tightly to the tree it could not sit down.
Oh.
Anyway. And so he then called 000.
Yes.
And that was at about 11 p.m. or just before 11 p.m. So police arrived, I think, at about 11:40.
Yeah.
and Toyah's parents arrived with friends, I think, at about 3 a.m.
Oh, my Lord.
Police-
Where were they coming from? Kansas?
Cairns, I think.
Okay.
So police told them to go home. It was too dark to search. He was instructed to make sure Toyah wasn't at the home. And at first light, then Toyah's family began their search of the beach. So they'd just been there waiting for it to get light enough to search. Marco did come back about 6:30 a.m. to help with the search. And then at about 7:45 a.m., about 800 metres from where her car was parked, not too far away from the tree the dog had been tied to, her dad found her body.
Very sad.
She was partially buried in the sand dunes. It was like not super hidden, but it was in a part of the beach that they said was not often frequented by tourists or visitors.
Yeah.
And the story was that the dad noticed like a mound in the sand set quite close to the dunes. He dug just a little bit, and there was a foot that was protruding from the sand. And he, of course, knew, without even seeing, that's what knew it.
Yeah, you would.
There were 2 more blood-stained patches of sand metres away from that burial site.
Yeah.
She was found naked, and there was no sign of her belongings. And that's important because her phone plays a part.
Tracking the phone.
Yes.
Okay.
It was reported that Toyah's dad had to be carried away from the crime scene by other members of the search party. And months later, he wrote on Facebook, "Toyah is my only child. Finding her body has burnt an indelible image in my mind. It is something a father should never have to suffer."
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was the backstory and the discovery of the body.
Yes.
The only other thing I want to note is that she was so loved. Like, they reported about her funeral, and it was in a church or place that held about 300 people, but there was like 400 people crammed in.
Wow,
So
very sad.
It is actually just so tragic.
Yeah.
And so there was an investigation, obviously. And again, a lot of this, well, most of it is from media reports.
Yeah.
Okay. So in terms of her injuries, her neck had a deep cut from one side to the other, which had cut across her windpipe.
Yeah.
And then she was buried. They're not sure if it was before or after she had actually died. So there was some question, had she been buried alive?
Yeah.
But the medical evidence seems to be that injury was not sustainable with life.
Yes.
So she was dying.
Yes.
Whenever she got buried.
Yes.
She also had a number of wounds to her body, including several along her torso and some defensive injuries to her hands.
Yeah. Do they know what kind of instrument causes this?
So no weapon has ever been found, but it was likely something that was easily concealed, like a paring knife or a pocket knife was the...
Why do they think that?
Might be because of the, they measure the depth of the cuts on her other wounds. Maybe they can tell the length of the blade and that sort of thing.
All right.
And her time of death was determined to be between 3:30 and 6:30 p.m.
Okay. So he calls it 7 after his hike, and she doesn't answer.
She doesn't answer.
So 3:18 was her last text.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So her last movements and her moments were pieced together using CCTV footage, dash cam footage, telephone cell tower data about where her phone was pinging, and forensic pathology data. So this was all of the evidence that they were looking at.
Okay.
A team of officers was tasked with collecting, viewing and analysing all of the CCTV and dash cam footage, and another team was in charge of her phone information. So her phone, after that text to Marco, which was the last communication, her phone had begun moving away from Wangari Beach towards Cairns later that evening.
Yeah.
And so at about 5:15, it pinged a cell tower about 28 kilometres away from Wangari Beach.
Wow, okay.
So this was obviously whoever, the supposition was that whoever killed her took all of her stuff to then get rid of it. So Detective Sergeant Matt Mattock
Okay, interesting name.
looked at footage to identify all cars whose movements were similar to the track Toyah's phone took.
Yeah, okay, so let's just understand that. So presumably they look at some traffic cams, they get the registration plates of cars driving in the area, they call up those owners, go, hi, have you got any dash cam of this? And the owners go, yes or no, did you see anything, blah, blah, blah. So they then piece that together and that turns up some dash cam, does it?
So I think they mostly used the cell phone pinging for where her phone was, and then they looked at main roads cameras.
Right, okay.
I'm pretty sure to see what cars were in both or all places.
Right, interesting.
And so one of the things that I think defence challenged was that they used what they called timing advance data from Telstra that was used to narrow the time frames and locations of focus. And so I think it was sort of extrapolating on the pings as to how far their search net should be is what I understand that to be.
Okay. Because those cell phone tower pinging doesn't give an exact location.
It's a range.
And I see. So if they say, well, 5 o'clock it's pinging at this location, and then at 5:20 it's pinging at this location. That's actually quite a wide area, and presumably if it's in this town of Cairns, there's a lot of different roads for them to then.
Yeah, so it was, I think, a huge undertaking.
Yeah,
they focused their investigation on about 70 cars captured travelling south through Clifton Beach during a 16-minute window of time between 4:54 and 5:10.
So is Clifton Beach where they live?
No, I think it's on the way back from Wangari
Beach
to Cairns.
Right, okay.
But apologies to the locals, I don't know.
Yeah.
So a number of cars were excluded from further investigation because they passed through key locations seconds before or after the chosen time frame.
Yeah.
Other cars were excluded when their drivers came forward to the police, and Sergeant Maddock apparently said...
So how does that exclude them?
Well, they must have spoken to them and had alibis or dash cam or whatever.
Yeah.
The police issued a media call out to the public for the drivers of those 70 cars of interest to come forward as part of the investigation. Around half of the drivers made themselves known to the police and were interviewed and were excluded.
That's a weird way to do it, because the police can, if they've got the registration, they can just call the registered owner, and the registered owner has to tell them who the driver was. You can claim the right to silence if you. But there's an obligation to tell the police who the driver was.
I don't know why license plates. CCTV footage captured a blue Alfa Romeo in areas corresponding to the movements of Toyah's phone on the day of her disappearance.
Yes, along with the 69 others by the
correct. Yes.
Right. Okay.
But so that spoiler alert was Rajwinder Singh's car.
Yep. Okay.
A Brisbane homicide detective, Adam Riley, created a series of maps to assist with the investigation. More than 20 maps from Innisfail to Wangari Beach were created, with the detective noting they incorporated timing advance data, the location of mobile phone cell towers, CCTV timing data, and the paths of both that blue Alfa Romeo vehicle and Toyah's phone. He also mapped mobile phone data, not that same degree of depth that was mapped for the Alfa Romeo, but mobile phone data relevant to two men, Evan McRae and Remy Fry. And they were named as possible other suspects.
Right.
And that's important.
And are they in two different cars, or are they both in the same car?
Different cars.
Right, okay. So they've got 3 suspects, but they're really focusing on the blue Alfa Romeo at the moment.
Yes.
Okay.
Data from their phones and CCTV footage also accounted for their movements on the day of Toyah's death. And so although they were possible suspects, I think that was only for a shorter time.
Right. So
they were called at trial.
Interesting. So the police get their mobile phones and then work out where their mobile phones are pinging, and then decide that's not near Wangari Beach at the relevant times or something.
Yes.
Okay. Interesting.
Now, under cross-examination, Sergeant Riley, who did the maps, said he was told not to create maps for any cars other than the Alfa Romeo.
Yeah,
so it was a
tunnel vision.
Laser
Tunnel vision, it's called.
Right.
Yes.
The court was told that timing advanced data can be used to identify the location of a mobile phone relative to the base station it is pinging, with a distance measurement calculated from the signal and its angle determined by the part of the cell tower that is activated.
Yeah, okay. So the cell tower has it's a round circle, and but they can tell which part of that circle it's coming from based on which side the ping is.
Yes.
And then I take it from what you said also, the strength of the pin indicates how close they are to the tower.
I think so.
Yeah.
There was a professor from the University of New South Wales School of Electrical Engineering with more than 40 years of experience in telecommunications research and teaching in Australia, England, France and Sweden, who was called to give evidence.
Okay, good.
That's our expert.
What his evidence was with this stuff you're talking about, is it?
Yes. Yeah. So he gave evidence about the way mobile phones and cell towers work, and said mobile phone radio signals will weaken as they travel greater distances, but they can also bounce off things and be affected by obstacles in their path.
Yes. Okay. So if there's not a line of sight to the cell tower, it
could impact. Yes.
Okay. Interesting.
So that was the cell phone stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In relation to Marco, the boyfriend, so as I said, he was investigated thoroughly. His friends gave corroborating accounts of what he'd done that day.
Yes.
He was the one who called the police.
Yeah, but I mean,
I know, but it is a factor.
Yeah, I mean,
not all killers call the police.
No, but lots of people who've been convicted of murdering their family are the people who alerted the police.
But often in those situations,
Henry Keogh, we've done a show on Henry Keogh. If anyone wants to listen to that, he called the police and was subsequently arrested.
But he didn't. Exactly.
Yeah.
So him calling the police wasn't a sign of guilt.
No. Well, I mean, I think they used it as a sign of guilt because they were trying to say that he was lying and he was.
You can't have it both ways.
No. But my point is that I don't think the police place much store by the fact that you call the police.
No, I know, but I also think that often the people who call the police when they have done the killing are sitting there accepting the blame.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay. Yeah. So you say the people who call the police often admit to it, and they call
because of the remorse and the
yeah.
All right. So most importantly, I think there was no CCTV footage of his car detected in the areas of interest that matched Toyah's phone pings.
Well, why was he one of the three people who they were focusing on?
No, he wasn't one of the three. This
is the boyfriend. Oh,
yeah.
Okay. No, that's sensible. And he's got the presumably timestamp photo at the top of Mount Bartlefree or wherever they climbed.
Well, as defence counsel, what would you have done with that piece of information?
I don't know. That's an interesting one. Well, they called into question that they tried to throw some shade on the boyfriend.
They tried to say that he or his mate knew how to change
manipulate
the date stamps.
Okay, interesting.
So his dog, by the way, was found 3 days later.
Oh, okay,
yes,
good.
with poor little damaged foot pads.
Right.
But yes. So I mean that corroborated another part of that story.
Yes.
The friend who went on the hike and had taken the selfie because it was on the friend's phone.
Yes.
Yeah, so he was cross-examined.
Yeah.
But he just refuted the fact that he'd changed the timestamps or the date stamps.
It's if you're looking at Occam's razor, the simplest answer is the most likely to be correct. That's a hard sell that you've got two people who are jointly involved in a murder and jointly lying and then jointly also go and change the timestamp on a photo. That's and particularly when they're both there to give evidence.
I think maybe it was that little window was open because I don't think the friend remembered for a couple of days after he'd spoken to the police that he'd taken the selfie.
Oh, right.
And he said as soon as he remembered, he sent it. But it wasn't as though it was all in that initial interview, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, okay.
So they also looked at his movements on CCTV and dash cam and could see that he was wearing the same T-shirt from early afternoon until the next day when the police obtained it from him for analysis.
So they take the clothes and analyze them for blood. I'm just gobsmacked by the number of people who have dash cams. That's all I'm saying.
I don't understand
it's unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah.
Why are we interested in recording when we're driving? I do the most boring driving trips.
But having said that, if I see footage of a crash or a stupid driver because someone had their dash cam on, I think, I'm glad they had their dash cam on.
Yeah.
But,
yeah. I mean, I get sucked into watching those reels as well. You're like, oh, is there going to be a crash here?
Or the near misses.
Yeah. Still, I just think,
I don't know. Maybe some cars come standard with them. Mine's too old. I don't know.
Okay. I don't know.
All right. So in terms of his clothes, there were, I should say, several small blood spots found on his T-shirt and a small fingernail-sized mark on the front part of the shirt and 3 spots on the inside of the back of the shirt. And
they turned out to be dog blood.
Well, as far as I know, there was no evidence given as to whose blood it was. But that makes me think if it was Toyah's, surely they would have revealed that.
Yes. Yeah, because you haven't talked about what I'm just waiting to hear.
What?
DNA.
Oh, I'm coming.
Yep,
coming.
Okay.
So apparently during the trial, defense counsel said that Marco was an angry man with a reason to kill her.
Interesting.
And this crime was a crime of passion. They also apparently criticised him for going home during the night and not returning until 6:30 the next morning.
We've talked on this podcast in a different context about drawing inferences from people's behaviour when they become aware of tragic things. And so I think it's equally true for the defence to, you're drawing a long bow there. You don't know how people would react when they find out that their girlfriend's missing and or dead. Well, they didn't know she was dead at that point, did they?
No.
They knew she was missing.
And so when they say he was an angry man, there did apparently become revelations that Toyah maybe had wanted to end things, and the airport guy who she was meant to pick up that night was a complicating factor.
Right.
So his name was Tyson Franklin, and he was also investigated.
Okay.
He admitted, I don't know why or how they knew this, but he admitted that he had accessed murder porn and rape porn in the week before she died.
Wow. Okay.
I know.
They looked at his laptop.
They must have.
Why are you going to blurt that kind of stuff out?
Why are you going to look at that stuff?
Okay, but presumably he's standing in the airport waiting to be picked up, and there's just CCTV cameras all over the airport.
Yeah, I don't think he was a real suspect, but I imagine it was to lay the foundation maybe for Marco.
Oh, I see. The
Maybe
police
from a
investigated
defense
it,
perspective
didn't pursue it, but then the defense got hold of it, made something of it.
So he had started a flirtatious exchange with Toyah in the weeks before her death.
What's the what is this text messaging? What are we talking?
Yes. They had met in early October when she went to his podiatry clinic.
Oh.
Yes. And that was for an appointment.
He's a podiatrist?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I assume so. He described her to the police initially as a friend.
Yes.
He said she was meant to pick him up from the airport. He'd tried calling her multiple times, but then he ended up catching an Uber. So under cross-examination, I think, he admitted he had feelings for her, for Toyah.
Okay.
But he said she had said she was in a relationship, and so, that was that.
But then she agreed to pick him up at the airport.
But then it turns out, in fact, there was a little bit more to it.
Right.
And I don't know how much beforehand, but they had a few weeks beforehand, they'd spent a day hiking and swimming together. They had dinner together, and then they spent the night together.
When did they spend the night together?
Slept together, I'm guessing.
Okay.
And from that point, they were texting daily.
Right. I mean, from a guy's point of view, that sounds to me like she is emotionally, more than interested.
So that was we know motive doesn't matter, but it's something.
It doesn't not matter. Well, it just can't be the only.
Essential.
Yeah, it can't be it can't be the central plank of the Crown case. Yeah. Okay, so she's got I won't say unconventional love life, because I don't know what young people are doing nowadays, but certainly a complicated one.
Complicated. And I guess if you've been with someone for 2 years and one of her friends had apparently said she was thinking about leaving, maybe she should have just left.
Sure.
I don't know.
Yeah, okay. Anyway.
The stress with managing more than one partner.
Oh, I totally agree.
don't understand how people do it.
I know.
Not that my husband is a stress, but I imagine trying to juggle would be very difficult.
Yeah, particularly when one partner doesn't know the other partner exists.
Correct. All right. So he wasn't really a suspect.
No, it sounds like you could discount it pretty easily.
So
but it sounds like the defence obviously made
something of it.
So I should say something here. In terms of your trial strategy as a defence lawyer, no matter what the case is, if you can put blame on somebody else, that's always a reasonable strategy. Let me just say this. In a murder case, it's a common strategy to blame the victim because the victim's not there to give evidence because they're dead. So, that's a common strategy because there's no one to give the alternative side of the story.
I don't like
this is a different kettle of fish here because you are blaming people who are alive and who come along and sit in front of the jury and give evidence.
Yes.
And that makes it much harder for the jury to accept because you've got to say to them, well, you're the murderer, whatever. And they go, well, no, I'm not. And the jury see that. And
so with a hung jury, you only needed one person to not be convinced,
Yeah, sure.
or to have a question about one of these other suspects.
Yeah, look, and I don't want to sound like I'm being critical of the defence. I'm just throwing a few things out there. Obviously, I haven't read the brief, so I don't know. But what strikes me about this case is not that. It is not the alternative suspects. It's, which we haven't even got to,
I'm about to.
Why it is they decided to ping this on Mr. Singh.
Well, I've got that too.
And my gut feeling, and again, this is halfway through the story, is that the jury there's going to be some hole in the prosecution case, which is really what they've hung their head on, not this alternative story that somebody,
I can't wait for you to get through this.
Well, you haven't got to DNA yet.
I know. All right, but so the other possible suspects. So Evan McRae called Crime Stoppers 5 days after Toyah's death to report his concerns about a suspicious person wearing a high-vis shirt he had seen on Wangari Beach weeks before. His motivations for coming forward were queried. Turns out there'd been an article written about him in the newspaper on October 25. So she was killed October 21, I think, which was sent to him by his ex-wife, which was titled Public Masturbator Photographed on Toyah Cordingley Murder Beach, which was him.
Right. And it was obviously before or after the murder.
Just after the murder.
And so he was at the beach after the murder.
Indecent act.
Doing an indecent act.
Yes.
And he was then motivated
to come forward. Yes.
To show that he wasn't a complete wanker.
And so he told police he'd gone to Wangari Beach with girlfriends in the past to be nude several times.
Okay, interesting.
And masturbating in public was not appropriate and not the same as being a nudist.
No, sure.
And he said he'd never been arrested or charged for anything like that, but he just wanted to get ahead of the story.
Yeah. Is this how he opens the Crime Stoppers call? I'd love to hear it.
I don't know. He had also left a note on a woman's car in early October at Wangari Beach with contact details for himself and a nudist resort, which he did also mention to the investigating police in case that woman came forward and said he was a weirdo.
So he's the one coming forward and saying there's another weird man on the beach.
Yes.
Besides me.
Yes. I guess he was terrified he was going to be a suspect.
Yeah. Okay. I suppose. Yeah.
But in terms of DNA, one little thing I'll say before we get into all the DNA was that a swab taken from her left hand, Toyah's left hand, returned results 340 times more likely to have been contributed by Evan McRae.
Right.
So, I mean, it's not a smoking gun.
It's not particularly good at all. I mean,
it's not good at all. No.
Oh, sorry. No, it's not particularly strong at all. 340 times. And what's the population of Cairns?
Well, I know.
50,000?
I know.
What does that mean? It's,
But it was on her hand.
50 people it could have been.
It wasn't near her, Anyway, just one thing to note.
Sure. Okay. Not particularly strong DNA evidence. Okay.
Yeah. But so in terms of where he was on that day, his
is this McRae? Yeah.
His mum said that she was home with him and his daughters the day of the murder.
Got it.
They all went out in the morning to buy a birthday present.
Yeah.
Then she took the girls to a birthday party.
Yeah.
McRae stayed home at that time, was still home when they returned at 1.
Yeah.
She said she believed he was at home for the afternoon, would usually take his daughter back to her mother at 5 p.m. And she hadn't noticed his car leaving in that time. So, I mean, I think he was pinged in the CCTV footage, but he was meant to be out and about returning his daughter at 5. So
Right, okay.
I guess it didn't have enough traction for the police.
Yeah.
But was muddying the waters from a defence perspective.
Okay, sure.
Is my thought.
Yeah, possibly.
All right, Remy Fry was a PE teacher who worked at Mariba State School in October. His whereabouts on the day was questioned because he was one of the cars flagged. He said he visited his mother and friends in Wangetti that day. He drove to his mum's place about 1, visited friends close by till about 3:30, then returned to his mum's and then drove back home to Kuranda, which is, I think, north of Cairns.
It's up in the mountains, yeah. That's where they do the cable car.
The little issue with him was that one of his friends disagreed with that and said he hadn't visited that day at all and he would remember because he had his daughter that day. So some doubt over whether he'd gone to the friend's place.
Wow.
He was seen on CCTV footage at the Clifton Beach service station at about 4:45 p.m.
Got it.
So defence focused on the fact he'd given a false account and was in the area.
Well, is it false? I mean, it's false if you assume that the friend is correct.
Yes.
I mean, it's two conflicting versions of events.
All right. So evidence from the beach. The search for evidence took 8 days. They brought up police divers from Brisbane and searched a lot of water spots around there, I think. The area of the beach where she was found was carefully searched because, remember, none of her belongings were
so they're
found.
looking for her belongings.
Yes.
Or a murder
I would
weapon.
imagine
so.
Okay.
Images
from the burial site showed the mound on the edge of the scrub surrounded by a number of logs and sticks, sort of like, I haven't looked. And then one of the photos showed the toes. Forensic scientist Sergeant Kylie Webster was responsible for excavating, collecting and cataloguing samples, biological and DNA materials from the site.
Okay. She
explained in court the complication of taking DNA samples from the sticks and driftwood at the scene, but they did.
Yes.
She said the largest area of blood stains was some metres away and it was not clear whether she had been dragged or carried between the two areas.
Okay, interesting.
Okay. So narrowing in on Rajwinder Singh.
Yes.
Okay. So the Blue Alfa Romeo belonged to Singh. He was a nurse living in Innisfail, and he had a wife and 3 children aged 1, 5 and 8 at the time. His wife at that time, so he and his wife had met in 2009 in India when they both lived in India, and I think it must have been an arranged marriage. They met once, then they got married. Then they moved the next year to Australia. And at that time, Singh's wife couldn't speak English, and even at the time of the murder, her English was not very good at all. But Singh came over on a student visa, and then they got permanent residency in 2013 and stayed. So the day after Toyah's body was found, Singh left his family, his job. He went to India. And he had not told anyone he was going. He didn't say goodbye to his wife, didn't say goodbye to his kids.
Okay.
He did not show up for a shift that he was meant to be doing, which was very unlike him.
Yeah.
And he'd just gone. So the key evidence seems to be DNA samples that linked Singh to the crime scene. His DNA was found on a stick protruding from the burial site, so actually in the mound, and also under her fingernails.
Okay, that's, you
more
probably
concerning.
Should have started with that. Yeah, that's, Okay.
Testing carried out in a New Zealand laboratory, perhaps because nobody likes our Queensland lab at the moment.
Yes, that's right.
Found DNA from Toyah's right fingernails were 310 times more likely to be Mr. Singh's than a person in the general population.
Again, not huge statistics, but...
The match to the stick was incredibly strong, up to 3.7 billion times more likely to be his than someone else's, which means globally 2 or 3 people could have had that DNA.
Yeah. Okay. All right. But sorry, but there's some problems with taking DNA samples from sticks. So
she said it was complicated.
Does it make it less reliable?
Well, I don't know. Scientist Rhys Parry was the case manager tasked with analysing the DNA samples. He compared them with the 92 reference samples from people in the area and those involved in the search or the investigation. And he said that out of the millions of pieces of information within a genome, scientists looked at 20 regions that were highly variable and then outlined the complex statistical calculations used to produce a likelihood ratio. He said a 2 times likelihood ratio was similar to saying 1 in 2 people might match. So a billion times ratio could be described as 1 in a billion people would be a likely match.
Yeah.
Now, Singh's DNA, well, I've got here it was received at the lab in March 2023. So they obviously were looking at him prior to identifying that it was him.
Really?
The lab conducted tests on a number of sticks and logs. Many of them returned results indicating they were 100 billion times more likely to match Toyah's DNA. So yes. No doubt there. And that's the number assigned to the highest certainty match.
Yes.
There were samples taken from different sites on the sticks and they had incomplete 2-person mixtures of DNA.
Yep.
And the likelihood that the second person was Singh ranged from that 3.7 billion times more to 4,100 times more likely to down to 2 times more likely. So huge variation in the probability results.
Presumably it's because of the reliability of the samples they're getting or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. What else did we want to say there? Well, the negative results. So testing of driftwood logs placed near the gravesite showed high likelihoods that he did not contribute to DNA samples there.
Oh, interesting. So there's other DNA samples not from the victim, not from him, but also on the driftwood. Okay.
Testing of the dog collar and the lead of the dog who'd been tied up. No link to Singh.
There.
And no blood or DNA from Toyah was found in Singh's house or car, but they didn't search that for a very long time.
But so I just want to circle back around to this idea. When do they get? So he becomes a person of interest because they identify his car.
Yeah.
And how do they get his DNA? Did they already have it?
Well, no, I guess not. So so they were drawn to his disappearance by his wife. So after he had not come home or been in contact for a couple of days, his poor wife went to the police. She'd heard a story about a young Indian man in Tully who'd been injured or killed, and she was worried it was him. And so she went to them and wanted help to find her husband. And so that led to this uncovering of the fact he'd disappeared.
Yes.
He had gone via Sydney to his sister's. She knew he was going to India but didn't know why he was going, and his mum and dad lived here in Cairns with them, and they didn't know that he was going, and they just never heard from him again.
Yeah.
A week after he got to India, he called his boss and said he had a lot going on. He was struggling with stuff. He wanted to resign. Could she organise his severance pay?
Yeah.
And she thought it was a very odd phone call, nothing like him. He wasn't going into detail what the struggles were or anything like that. And so that was literally it from him. And so I guess then with the Alfa Romeo, what's it called?
Yeah, it was an Alfa Romeo.
Alfa Romeo car, that was his car, pinged in those areas.
Yes.
And then his disappearance in very strange circumstances, he was on their radar.
Yes.
And so he'd disappeared. They had sent police officers to India to look for him, I think, or had tried to get an extradition agreement, which they did eventually get, but they couldn't find him.
Yeah.
And then in November 2022, they issued a $1 million reward for information or
leading to
the return of him.
Yeah.
January 2023.
Yeah.
Oh, here he is.
Bingo.
Yeah. And people did claim that $1 million reward.
Yeah, self-interest is a great motivator.
So he was back in January 2023.
Yeah.
So that said that the DNA was received in March 2023. So I'm guessing all of that DNA evidence came once he had been brought back.
Right. Okay.
I'm guessing.
Yeah.
All right. So the phone matched the path that Singh's car had taken, and apparently it was a very meandering route that he took back. The police, I think, were suggesting he was trying to find a place to dump the belongings and the phone and that sort of thing. Like he took detours and a path that took him 30 minutes out of his way home with no real reason for doing that. So that was all part of it.
Interesting. So it matched as far as they could tell.
Yes.
Because they can't get they can't get an exact location for the pinging of the
cell phone
at any time. They can get exact location when he drives under a traffic camera.
Yes.
But other than that.
They also said he didn't come forward to be identified as so many others did.
Yeah, there's another 35 did.
All right. So he because he left,
on the phone and call him,
I do feel really sorry for his wife. So she still didn't speak very good English then. She couldn't access the bank accounts. They lost their home.
Oh, no.
Yeah, because she said they went bankrupt, but I think they must have foreclosed and they had to move. And so, her whole life was completely
absolutely. The couple
derailed.
2 young children?
3
young children.
3 little children.
That was a hard road to sow.
Yes. The other thing that happened in terms of evidence was that once he was in custody, a covert undercover officer spoke to him in the cell,
pretending to be another,
and recorded their conversation. So it was, all recorded.
Yeah, so we've seen that about.
I know, but guess what he said?
What does he say?
He said he saw her being killed.
Oh.
He saw her being killed. He didn't see the faces of the person of the people who did it. I think he said.
And that's why he fled the country.
I don't know the person killed. I didn't see their faces. The killers, I think they will kill me. And so that's why he said he fled.
Okay. Does he give evidence at his own trial?
I don't think so. Okay. I don't recall reading any.
But that obviously piece of information went before the jury. His admission.
That recording.
Admission. Yeah. Okay. Interesting, because that DNA evidence under the fingernails sounds quite compelling.
Well, he's placed himself there.
He places himself there.
He says, "I was there," so it is his DNA. There's no disputing that, and so it is problematic. I can see that there are issues with the Crown case.
What issues do you see?
Well, I think.
It seems a reasonably compelling case to me.
Do you think so?
I do.
Okay, I'm so excited that I've given you this and getting your perspective.
DNA under the fingernails, I think, is very hard to try.
Even though it was that 340.
Yeah, that's not a high percentage. But if they're strangers to each other, if it was somebody she knew, then you go, but if they're strangers to each other, it's like, well, how does this DNA get there?
Yes.
But I wonder if the jury, if this formed part of the argument at all, that she was obviously killed in a violent way. So there's no accidental death. It's whoever did it intended to kill her.
And there was evidence about her togs being cut and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So there's no question about a manslaughter instead of murder. It's definitely whoever did it was guilty
intended.
Of murder.
Yeah.
But I wonder, is there any suggestion that it was more than one person? And so the jury thought, well, we don't know whether he was the one who actually did it or whether he was just standing next to them or something.
Well, from what I can gather from the reporting of the defence summing up.
Yeah.
They argued there were other possible suspects, such as Marco or those other local men, that the DNA could have been transferred indirectly because he admitted he was at the beach that day.
Yeah.
No direct evidence that proved he killed her because he wasn't seen with her. The murder weapon was never found.
No murder weapon, yeah.
And he fled not because he was guilty, but because he was scared and overwhelmed.
Yes, by witnessing a murder. And so that, because obviously that's a very troubling piece of information that he just disappears afterwards. So that the defence need to explain that away. They give an explanation that he's concerned about this person who he's witnessed a murder and so he flees. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But
the prosecution, on the other hand, I think in their summing up closing address, they said the evidence is clear. He buried her based on DNA.
On the stick, and
he had her phone based on the matching movements, and he fled immediately, showing consciousness of guilt.
Yeah, and there's DNA under her fingernails.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's quite a compelling case. Anyway, I mean, obviously we didn't sit through the trial, so we didn't see these people give evidence. We don't know. But the jury, obviously, or at least one member, had a reasonable doubt based on all they'd heard.
Yeah. Do you know they went on a view?
Oh, to the beach.
To
okay.
the Wangati Beach,
Yeah.
which I think better than a day in court sometimes.
Yeah.
Drive.
Go out to the view.
They also did a poll of the jury, like they did with Patel, where they posed questions to see if any of the jurors
before they
had
impaneled
bias.
them. Yeah. And what did they find?
The questions included whether or not a person had displayed a Justice for Toyah bumper sticker, had posted in social media channels about the case, had donated to causes related to her death, or had attended her funeral.
Yeah.
Anyone who answered yes was excused from the panel.
Yeah, and that's
they don't often do that polling of the
No,
jury.
but it was obviously, I mean, if there's bumper stickers, it was I mean, I remember hearing about it in the media, but obviously in Cairns it was a big issue. And so, very appropriate that they do some kind of polling of the jury.
What else? I think that was all I wanted to say. Current status, yes, hung jury and discharge on March 18, retrial November 2025.
Watch this space.
So what do you think the prospects of conviction are on the retrial?
Well, I wouldn't like to speculate, but I can say that the statistics that I've heard as a general proposition for prosecution on a retrial is that they're 60% likely to win a retrial.
Really?
Well, because they know what the defence is going to argue. They get to tidy up any of the
But so
bumps in
your
own case.
little feeling that a retrial after a hung jury, that's a red flag. What do you think in this case?
I say it's a red flag in cases where there's significant problems in the prosecution case, and they should really, Henry Keogh, for example, Cardinal Pell, they really should have gone, we can't get a jury to agree, let's go back and have a rethink, as opposed to just, blazing on.
I know. I think what defence did say was, if you think that these other possible suspects are innocent, but there are things that potentially make them look guilty, you need to apply that same reasoning to Singh, that he is innocent, but there are things that potentially make him look guilty.
Yeah.
And if you believe that about these other suspects, then that must create a reasonable doubt for Singh.
You should work for the defence. That's a really good...
No, that wasn't my argument. I'm pretty sure that's what they were positing.
An excellent argument.
Oh, I'm sure whoever...
an excellent argument in terms I can see the rhetorical strength in it, yeah.
And so I, from prosecution, was like, how would that not create a doubt for some of the jury? And I guess that's what it did do.
Yeah.
So I wonder, that was very good. He didn't even have to say they were guilty.
No, just had to throw
but
out.
But say, makes them look guilty.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So I
watch this space.
I think him fleeing is problematic. I think the DNA is problematic. So I'll be interested to see what happens on the retrial.
So will I.
Anyway.
Okay. Thank you, Lizzie. Very well researched, even though we didn't have a judgment.
No judgment. Lots of media. Thank you to the journalists. And hopefully we got it right.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the episode. If you enjoyed it, please rate and review or like and subscribe. It all helps Lizzie and I keep this podcast going. If you're interested in clips, you can look at them on Instagram and TikTok. Just search for Justice Matters Pod. See you next episode.